Millennials in the workplace. It's a very important topic for companies of every size. And today, on episode number 134 of CXOTalk, we have an interesting show. I'm Michael Krigsman, and I am joined first off by a guest host, Lauren Brousell, who is a staff writer at CIO.com. Lauren, and a millennial herself. Lauren, how are you?
I'm well. Coming off of a Sunday where the Patriots won. I'm very happy this morning. How about you?
I am great, coming off a Sunday that was a beautiful day, and here in Boston we have yet another beautiful day. And Lauren, we're joined today by Dan Schawbel, who is a millennial, but he has also written 2 books. He runs a couple of companies doing both consulting and research, and he's a pretty interesting guy.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us. So let's start by briefly give us a sense of your background and your professional focus.
Sure. So I had my first internship in high school, 7 more in college. I started my first business my sophomore year of college doing website design. Then I spent 3.5 years at a company called EMC Corporation based in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, a big Fortune 200 technology company. I had 3 different positions there. I went from product marketing to online marketing to creating the first ever social media position. And I created that position based on the work I'd done outside of work on nights and weekends. So I started a blog 10 to 12 times a week. I started a magazine, all under the idea of personal branding and positioning myself as the millennial person focused on that topic. And from there, I started writing a book proposal because I was fascinated by the fact that I was kind of building my brand online, and then internally I got this new opportunity because Fast Company had profiled me. And then my book came out April 2009, and then from there I started my first company, Millennial Branding, in January 2010. And then from there, I started WorkplaceTrends.com, which is a research membership service for HR professionals. I'm working my 26th primary research study since 2012. So funded about $500,000 of funding, and I'm working on several other projects. But my main focus is on the workplace, especially helping and supporting my generation from student to CEO.
So how did you, all right, so you've been, how'd you get all this stuff done? I mean, you've been doing a lot of things. How do you get it all done?
Well, it used to be 0 work-life balance, and I think life is more about work-life integration now because of how technology has really changed everything for us. But for when I first started, I recognized that if I wanted to be successful long-term, I had to make short-term sacrifices. So I work for 40, 50, maybe even 60 hours a week at EMC, and then outside of work, I would come home and start writing and building, everything that I was doing. So we're talking over 100 hours a week. I used to call my apartment in Waltham, Massachusetts, the cave, because I really wouldn't go out unless I was going to work, commuting like 45 minutes to work in Hopkinton. And then slowly, I was building and launching and getting more opportunities. And now I don't even really consider it work at this point, but I would say I probably work about 60 hours a week, 7 days a week.
So when did you realize that millennials was a thing? I know it's something we hear about all the time now in every different industry and topic, but when did you sort of realize that that was something you could build off of?
Well, because my first angle was being a personal branding expert from a millennial standpoint. And so I knew that my generation was all creating these profiles on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere, and that they started to understand the power of leveraging this to boost your career. But I was like on the forefront in 2006 before, when LinkedIn wasn't even that popular. I was writing about how to best use LinkedIn for your career. And then I realized that and I saw a statistic that said millennials will be 75% of the global workforce by 2025, and I was a millennial, and I was already focused on career paths, and I wanted to kind of transition to the second book and everything I was doing with Promote Yourself, and it was a pretty easy segue because already a millennial, so I was already somewhat qualified. I was already doing a lot of research, and everything kind of clicked, and I saw that new direction to go with, and then I created this larger arc, this larger mission of helping my generation from when I was in college and kind of growing with them till they're taking over and leading companies. So everything kind of clicked at once, but all the pieces were being put together over a longer period of time.
So tell us about your book. Tell us about your book, Promote Yourself. What is the story behind that? Why did you write it, and what's the focus?
Well, Promote Yourself is a continuation of my first book, Me 2.0. Me 2.0 was supporting millennials in the phase of going from college to first job. So Promote Yourself, think of it as you have your first job, how do you get ahead? How do you get to that management level position? And so I partnered with American Express to do a study of millennials and their managers in America, and so I found various things like managers are looking for great communicators, people who can best manage their time and manage projects, and team players. Those are the top 3 things that they're looking for, among other things, but really a focus on soft skills. So that's a huge chapter of the book. It's probably like 45 pages. So why was I curious? I was a millennial. I was that millennial worker who was trying to move up in a company, and I did twice. And I wanted to basically demystify the art of getting ahead, the art of moving up in a corporation, especially to the management level.
And so what is you talk about the new workplace. What is the new workplace and the rules associated with it?
I think one of the big rules that it really puts a lot of stress on the worker now. So if you do a survey, and we've done surveys on this, what is the biggest challenge for a professional? They say staying relevant, because the world is constantly changing, and you have to adapt to change, and that's kind of one of the new rules is, understanding that things are changing quickly. You have to understand what the new technologies are. You have to understand how the best way of doing your work is at that given point in time. Be a good problem solver, and you have to understand that the skills you have today might not be relevant in 2 years, and that the job you have today might transform in the next 5 years. So always not only be looking to get the skills you have today and brush up on kind of those skills, but always look on what's the next thing, what's the next thing, what's the next thing. And if you do that, you'll be ahead of the curve, and you'll be able to transition into future opportunities because you already have the skills before everyone else. Reputation is currency, meaning that people are moving from job to job so much now. I mean, millennials move from job to job every 2 years. I think it's over 40% of millennials think you should only stay at a job for under a year. So it's 60% of all professionals in America, once they get a job, they're already looking for their next job. This is the climate we live in. Because of that, comes a little bit less about where you're working and more about the reputation that you're building in the public and in that company, because that's the one thing that's mainly transferable. Another thing is there's multiple generations at work. Starting in May, Generation Z will enter the workforce. So you have Gen Z, you have Millennials, Gen X, and Boomers. So there's a technology gap. There's a lot to be learned here. A lot of 10,000 Boomers are retiring every day. So the goal for younger generations is to partner with older generations to kind of get that intelligence, knowledge. So when Boomers retire, you're positioned to kind of lead the next generation of companies. In terms of job descriptions, all you do is what you were assigned. You won't get ahead now, and you might even be replaced. So you, as the person who is accountable for your own career, have to constantly get intelligence and do more than your job description if you want to get ahead. Jobs are very temporary. Your company can be acquired. It can be merged. So many different things could happen. You can be laid off. A company can go under. You always have to be prepared for that next step, and that's your responsibility. And then the last thing is your personal life is now public. What you say online can affect how you're treated in the workplace, and what you do offline can affect how others talk about you online. So everything is very interrelated now, so you have to be much more careful and much more conscious about what you're putting out to the world.
So what role do you think millennials play in this new workplace? I mean, we've covered technology, that's an obvious one, but what sorts of things do you think that they're driving forward in terms of affecting the other generations and how they've always approached their work?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, the one that most people get excited about when I tell them about it, is uncovering the why. Why are we doing this today? How are you giving back to the community? So we've done a ton of research worldwide on this, and millennials especially strive to help the world. They want to make a difference. So companies have to show them how their products or services benefit society, and they need to be able to support their local community. So if you're a big company but you have a site in Connecticut, you got to be able to somehow support your local community and maybe have millennials volunteer as part of that support group so you can show them that you're not just in business to make money. That's the really big one. The other one is, I think, flexibility. It's one of the things that everyone wants. I think, I'm working from home right now. I think that more and more people are willing to take a pay cut for that type of flexibility to work remote, whether it's a Starbucks, a co-working space, your home. So every generation now is going to demand more of that. And then as the next is going to be this huge baby boom in the next 3 to 5 years of all these millennials, 80 million millennials in America having babies. There's going to be a lot of pressure on companies to have these work flexibility programs. And if you don't, you might lose talent even if you're a good company. And then I think speed of change has had a huge impact too. Your company is not high growth, or you don't have at least a division that's high growth, it's going to be very hard to attract my generation. We're all about the companies that are moving fast, that are high growth, that are exciting, that are changing. So the companies that have the same stock price as they did 5 years ago, they're in big trouble, and it's harder for the big companies to adjust to the new realities of the workplace and build cultures that reflect millennial interest.
So how do you make yourself worthy of being talked about? In your book, you say you've got to make yourself worthy to be talked about. Tell us how to do that, Dan.
Sure. So again, you focus on what's assigned to you. You master it, so you become the best at it in the whole organization, and then you make sure that your employer, manager, sees how good of a job you're doing, and when they do, they're more likely to give you more responsibilities, bigger projects, and those projects come with more visibility, more connections.
And so how do you, so tell us the steps. You want to be worthy, you want to develop a personal brand. How do you do that? Obviously, it's harder than it seems.
Yeah, you need a niche expertise, right? You need to be the best at what you do for a specific audience. That's kind of how you position yourself in the marketplace now. So if you think about it in the workplace, in the confines of the workplace, are you the best at Microsoft Excel formulas? It could be as simple as that. And if you are so good at something that's becoming more valuable to your company, or it currently is, then people will naturally seek you out. I mean, the best example is when I had the first social media position at this Fortune 200 company, everyone in the company knew because they knew I was the resource. I kept working on these projects, and through word of mouth, people from around the world would contact me being like, we're looking to do this campaign on Twitter. We're looking to figure out how to use Foursquare at this conference. And so that created a lot of value for me and excitement, and I think that's what you need to do is you really need to triple down on your strengths and find something that the company needs that's kind of underserved, or there's no true expert who's focused on it.
So when you sort of self-appoint yourself as that expert in-house at your company, and you've got that, on solid ground, how do you go forth and publicize that so more people know about it beyond the walls of your actual company?
Well, I think it's one by one. So, each person you affect will potentially tell 5 people. And then the other thing is a lot of these companies, my old company, we have internal networks where you kind of passively promote your expertise, whether it's the expertise you're known for in the company or outside the company. And then, over time, if you're really good, one person will talk to you, and through word of mouth, like any other brand that's ever been created, it will grow. And especially with online branding and marketing, you can grow exponentially. But again, outside of the workplace, it's extremely hard to break through now. Even if I were to start today, it would be very hard. I started in 2006, less competition. If you blogged back in 2006, people would find you. If you blog today, you have to spend like a ton of time just trying to get that blog post seen. So different climate outside of the corporate walls right now.
What would your advice be to somebody that would want to, go down that entrepreneurial sort of path right now, given the level of competition you mentioned?
Yeah, I think it has to do with quantity and quality. I think like I did, I think part of the reason why I broke in years ago is because I did 10 to 12 blog posts a week, and I commented on every blog in the world that would even mention personal branding. And I think that strategy still works, but it's effort. So it has to be something you really care about and you're committed to. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Plus, you have to give it at least 6 months. You have to give it at least 6 months. A lot of people, they don't see results immediately. We live in a very instant gratification society. If they're not getting into the New York Times in a week, they give up. So 6 months, focus on it. If it doesn't work and you still are entrepreneurial, want to try a different topic, then do that. So at least give it 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So 6 months of focus, and you're saying that this is to develop an online, a personal brand inside an organization as opposed to...
Actually, both. I would say both. Outside, definitely. I thought we were talking about outside, but internally, it takes time. Because remember, you have to affect people, and people have to get to know you and recognize you, and it takes 6 months to be a fully productive employee at your company anyways. You have to know who you're working with. You have to get a scope of the training and what you're selling and services and products and people, and there's a lot to this. So I think 6 months is your time to really boggle down, focus, become the best at what you do, and then start shining at the end of that 6 month period when you're already trained and you already know who to network with.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to say, and the most important thing from this, is things aren't going to happen overnight. I mean, there's no overnight success. It takes a long time. I mean, the only reason why I would get another book deal or found another company is because I've done all of these, like over 100 speeches, over 1,000 written articles. I've interviewed 1,500 people. I've done 26 research. All of this stuff adds up that enables me to make other decisions. But if you're just starting out, you want to write one article. Like, it's baby steps, right? It's what can you do every day that's going to lead eventually to your goals, even if you're not getting paid every day to do that. So it is that sacrifice, and anyone who I communicate with who is willing to make those sacrifices, oh, I'll speak at this college for free. Like, it all starts off like that. I spoke for 3 years for free at all the colleges in Boston and California and all these places, and now I'm getting paid a pretty significant amount of money just to speak for an hour. And so, but that wouldn't happen unless I fine-tune myself, unless I practice, and unless I hone my content and got like endorsements and video from those events. So it's all about marketing yourself. It's all about accumulating. For me, it's about associating yourself with brands. So if you look at my bio, in every sentence there's at least one brand that you've recognized, and it's because my thought is, if you don't know me, this brand you have heard, so through that brand association, I have more credibility. And so that's why I think when you graduate and everything you do, try and align yourself with brands in some capacity, partnerships, who you work for, who you write for, everything, because then long term it makes your life a lot easier.
So you're basically leveraging the third-party brand's reputation, associating yourself with that in order to propel your personal brand reputation.
Absolutely. So people don't know you, they've heard of these brands, and through those brands, people will start to know you. That's the logic that I've had since the beginning for like 8 years or so.
And what about this notion of being your own publicist? That's obviously very connected with this as well.
Well, I think at the larger perspective, it's people won't invest in you unless you invest in yourself first, and you're your own best publicist. So no one's going to talk highly about you unless you kind of create your brand first and you put the effort in. So it's all about, it's like creating this tidal wave. It's like, it's the first press hit's the hardest to get, the first book deal's the hardest to get, the first internship's the hardest to get, the first job's hardest to get. So because of that, you have to kind of start to market yourself, maybe do freelance projects, maybe you got to do something in order to prove that you have intelligence, that you have results, and then through that, you can start to break in, you can start to get more opportunities. Through pitching yourself to all these outlets, you just need a few, they break in, and then you say, oh, I was already featured in these places, you should feature me, and all these things. So eventually, the doors open. It's the most challenging to open the first few doors because you have no track record. So through life, your goal is how do I get a track record and a reputation as quick as I can so I can start to then build upon that.
So you're constantly pitching.
It's a race to get enough credibility as quick as possible and then grow from there.
And are you constantly pitching, or at that time you were constantly out pitching? And how did that work? What were you pitching, and how did you go about doing it?
I would say my whole life is a pitch at this point. I mean, literally, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, every day I'm just pitching. I'm pitching right now in a sense, indirectly, but pitching to get new clients, pitching to get my research in the media, pitching. It's just pitch, 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 pitch. You're always selling yourself. And if you're not doing that and you don't have a sales team, then no one's going to sell you, and then your competitors or other people will get the publicity, they'll get the clients, and you'll lose out. So it really is a lot. It's very competitive nature. You're competing against people around the world, and if you're not seen, if you're not positioned well, if you Google workplace expert or career expert or millennial expert or workplace speaker or personal branding, you're going to get me either on number 1 and 2. So it's a positioning game. It's a fight to get noticed. It's like a fight to get noticed so that you have the opportunity to potentially get new clients and more visibility and more opportunities.
Yeah. So in terms of the personal branding aspect that takes place on social media, what are some of the golden rules that you follow so that you do get noticed on social media among all the noise?
It's interesting. So I always admit that I used social media heavily when I was first starting out. There was less competition. It felt natural. It was part of my personal branding platform that I had to do it. And now I rarely use it, and I rarely use it because it's extremely competitive. So if you tweet, back in 2006, 2007, you tweet and you have, let's say, 200 followers, most of them are going to see what you wrote. Now I have hundreds of thousands of followers and fewer people actually read it. So it ends up being, where do you spend your time? And because the way I sell is B2B, it doesn't make as much sense. People know I'm on social media, but if I want to sell, I'm sending you an email, I'm speaking at your conference, I'm going to meet you for lunch in New York. It's different because the nature of what I do and because I recognize that the social media impact of what I'm trying to do is not as significant, and you only have so much time. You're working in several businesses and projects, so where do you spend your time? So I think, but if I were to revert to how I normally do it based on your question, I would say, make it more about the followership, because then you'll get more followers rather than self-promotion. But at the same time, 1 out of, let's say, 10 tweets should be some sort of self-promotion so people can see that you're credible. Again, you're refreshing, plus maybe you're trying to sell a product, maybe you're trying to get a job, or you have some sort of goal that you need met. And if all you do is soft sell and you never make a hard sell, your goals won't be met. So I think it's both. I think you need both, but I think you need more value generation and giving and support and giving resources away rather than self-promoting all the time.
Mm-hmm. So your advice is to really just weigh the relevancy of social media towards your actual goals or whatever you're doing, to just see whether it's a real fit for worth your time.
Yeah, for you it's perfect, right? If you're in journalism, you not only have to do it, not only have to promote your articles and whatnot on it, but it's how you find out about news. So like, you wake up in the morning, you're like, what do I cover? And then you go on Twitter, you're like, oh, these are trending, maybe I can parlay this into a CIO story, and then you come up and then maybe you reach out to people you already see on Twitter who are talking about it. So there's a great angle for you there, but not as powerful for other people.
Now, how do you create evangelists? That's part of your program, is you need to have evangelists working on your behalf, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you create those evangelists?
So I think part of it is you find these people, and let's say in the workplace, give you context, then you see that they're having trouble getting all their work done, or they need help, or you see what they're doing and you think you could do a better job or help them improve or something, and you add value without asking for anything in return. And once you start to help out other people without asking for anything, people will want to evangelize you. They'll want to help you out and reciprocate. So think about like both book launches actually. I'm going to help and promote every single author I can find, and then a percentage of those authors will want to reciprocate, and then my book will be successful. It's just one example, but a lot of my author peers do the same strategy that I had developed for years, is help everyone else out, support them, and then now these people will start talking about you. They'll start to support the projects that you do naturally because you thought about them first.
It's good karma.
That too. Not everyone will reciprocate. It's all about percentages. Life is about percentages, and that's why you see so many people, like we were saying earlier, like submitting 1 million resumes for each job, is because if I submit 100 resumes, maybe I'll get 3 interviews, and maybe one of those interviews will be turned into my next job. That's the logic that people have, which is not always the smartest logic, because then they're just applying to these random positions and they don't fit in the corporate culture. They're unhappy, and everyone ends up losing anyways.
So the key here then is to constantly be helping other people out, essentially.
That's it. I mean, that's what business is. That's what life is. That's everything. So, and here's what's interesting is when I was in college, I'd go to these networking events. I'd be scared at these networking events because I thought my perception was I have to go over to these people and say, can you get me a job? Can you hire me? Can you refer me? And that was very uncomfortable for me back then. And then through blogging made me realize, wow, I'm writing 10 to 12 blog posts a week and no one's reading it. That means I really like it and I think it's important and I'm willing to give and help people without really asking for anything. There's no advertisers or anything. And that, from there, it just has spiraled. Now I'll just reach out to so many people, I'll help people, people ask for my help. So I almost create this community, this network of people who know that you can help them in your value. And if I email them, they'll probably help me. So it just feels better, and it's not like, it's very hard for me to go up to a random person and be like, do this for me, if they don't even know who I am. So I think giving in general, like, it's almost like if you're a company, you want to give value, and that value is in the form of a product or a service. So you're helping people, and then as a result of helping people with that product or service that people need, people will buy it, and your company will be profitable.
Very different from the kind of notion of cutthroat business where everybody around you is your competitor and you have to undermine them in politics. I mean, it's a very different approach.
Yeah, I think I get it from probably my dad and uncle, whereas they had their own companies and they didn't fund mine. I'm self-funded, but they were all about, the soft sell. My dad is, I look at him and he's like your best friend, and buying from your best friend is pretty easy compared to buying from a stranger or someone who's soliciting you.
So let's talk about millennials. And we hear about Gen X and Gen Y, and on your website you also talk about Gen Alpha, and there's Gen Z. So when we talk about millennials, what are we talking about here?
So millennials and Gen Y means the same thing. They're interchangeable. And now I'm going through presentations and I'm making sure it just says millennials because people are more familiar with the term millennials because of the media rather than Gen Y. And these are people born between the dates I use, 1982 and 1993, and I was born in 1983. And there's 80 million of them. They are the largest percentage of the workforce compared to boomers and Gen Xers right now as of this year. There's actually a study by Pew that came out that showed that compared to older generations, millennials do not want to or do not consider themselves millennials. Boomers more so consider themselves boomers. Gen Xers consider themselves Gen Xers, but millennials do not consider themselves millennials, which is interesting. But I think it's about pride. But most diverse generation, most educated generation, most connected generation until you see Gen Z, who enters the workforce next year. And I think that expectations are much different. We were raised. Before my parents, threw them away. I have all these soccer trophies. Everyone gets a trophy is how we're kind of categorized. And we never really won any games, but everyone was given a trophy just for playing. And so we were told we're special. So we get to this workplace, this is why companies who customize products and services for millennials, that's why they're doing pretty well, because that's what we're looking for. That's part of what we look for. But also in the workplace, we have these high expectations. And you head into the workplace, you're like, what? This is like an old environment. There's like cubicles. There's, it's the same command and control structure that's always been with boomers. And millennials, when we did a research study that CEO covered was, they're all transformational leaders. So they want to encourage and support others. They care about a business that is supporting the world and not just making money. And so it's just a different type of person with a different type of approach. And whereas older generations fear them, I think that it's really time to support them, because a fourth of managers as of this year, and the number one complaint they have is they're unprepared for these positions. So you have all these boomers retiring. You're going to have 20 million in the next 5 years retire, and millennials, becoming the leaders in these companies, yet they're unprepared. So I think that companies need to do a better job with leadership development programs and supporting millennials in terms of mentoring, shadowing, online learning. Most companies have these training manuals still where millennials want the online learning. So I think we need to start engaging millennials in a new way in which supports them, so when they're in these positions that they're successful and not fail. And we can't afford to have the millennials fail at these positions because there's so many of them and because so many boomers are retiring. And so they need to be set up for success, and that's the company's responsibility to start to kind of evolve their workplace in order to support this new generation.
So how much do you think that technology is driving the millennials, quote unquote, high expectations, and also their tendency to want to shake things up?
Well, I think it ends up being culture, the nature in where they grew up, technology, and the economy. I mean, these are the biggest things that have impacted millennials. Economy, of course, the delayed adulthood. So they put off buying cars, buying houses, having families, getting married, having children, all of these things. From a cultural standpoint, raised very coddled with parents. Parents are the big influencer in their lives, in terms of their careers and purchasing decisions. And then from a technology standpoint, we grew up when technology was revolutionizing the world. We're like the Facebook generation. The social network movie was basically made for us and has influenced millennials. Everyone has an app now. So we look at millennials, a lot of them work for companies, but they always have these side projects. It's like the side gig generation. It's almost like everyone's an entrepreneur now. And we did a study on this a few years ago that said 90% of millennials view entrepreneurship as a mindset instead of the role of a business owner. So it's very entrepreneurial. I think every generation will become more entrepreneurial. You see teenagers who are giving TED Talks now, so those are Generation Z, huge changes. And the technology gap is getting really wide, and it's making older generations very uncomfortable because it's not easy. I'm telling you, I mean, even for my parents to understand how to instant message is complicated. They just learned text messaging, I think, last year. So this gap is really going to pose a problem for older generations and just all generations in terms of how they communicate and build relationships in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. So my other question is about Generation Z, which is the generation just under the millennial generation. So if millennials are pushing these high expectations, this expectation of the latest technologies at their fingertips in the workplace, what do you see that Generation Z will bring to the table when they enter the workforce?
So we have predictions. We did a study with Randstad of 1,000 millennials and 1,000 Gen Zs from 10 different countries. And it's just preliminary because they're not in the workforce, but we think they might be more loyal because they see millennials jumping from job to job and they want more stability, especially because they're recovering from the recession and there's $1.3 trillion of student loans. They're more entrepreneurial. And again, I think every generation will become more entrepreneurial because of access to information, resources, and people. And that grows on a by-second basis. And then the other thing is they're going to use technology more to get their work done and accomplish tasks, which is no surprise.
Yeah, another big part of the millennial topics that are talked about a lot out there are the perceptions around the generation. The fact that millennials are job hoppers, they need a lot of feedback and hand-holding. They're never satisfied. They always want cool workspaces and not plain old cubicles and boring office spaces. So in your experience, what's the most ridiculous one that you've heard that you feel like really needs to be?
This is easy. So in the Wall Street Journal, the craziest one I've heard that I always get these like expressions of to like discontent and surprise when I present in front of these crowds, and it's 8% of millennials have brought a parent on a job interview. And at Google, they have a whole waiting area for parents. So it just shows you how the parents have such an impact on their lives and how closely connected they are. And in terms of decision making, convincing a parent that you're a great company is pretty important, because you have all these companies like LinkedIn that they have bring your parent to work day, and they had that. I mean, my dad brought me to work, but I guess he was the owner. But that's what you're going to start seeing, the connection, the idea of work and life becoming even more blended through integrating parents and managers, integrating where people work, closing news gaps, being able to use technology to do whatever you want, whenever you want. People living online, people living on their phone, and that being intertwined with what they do for work. I mean, it's kind of chaos in some ways, but it's the nature of how this world is being brought together through mobile phones and tablets and computers.
So how can employers create an attractive workforce for millennials?
Yeah, so number one is you need to figure out how you're serving the world, how you're serving your local communities, and then how the millennial and what they do on a daily basis is part of that overall mission, by basically communicating that to them, showing them, hey, these tasks that you're doing, this is how it helps the team, this is how it helps the manager, this is how it helps the organization, this is how it helps the customers, this is how that helps the world. So drawing those connections is important. I think, again, the flexible workplace we discussed earlier, that's essential. Allowing someone to work from home one day a week, or finding a co-working space for them. Basically being flexible in terms of hours, everything, and making it more about results rather than hours worked or time spent work or where work is being done. Another thing is some flexibility. Oh, the other thing is letting them get involved in discussions. So, just because you have a 50,000 person organization, why not have the millennials see what's going on in the boardroom? Why not have a flatter organization in terms of how people are communicating and spreading information? They want their voices to be heard. I don't blame them. I think every generation, Gen Z, we see the same thing. They're going to want that. And the other thing that I think is very special is they want a very transparent workplace with honest leaders. That is the number one leadership trait they're looking for, is honest leadership. So in terms of promoting leaders, in terms of having managers and directors and VPs in your organization, honesty is a trait that is very important. And then vision. And then transparency. I mean, you look at Whole Foods, you can look up in Whole Foods how much everyone's making. So salary transparency is really important, and that's part of how the gender wage gap is going to get closed. So I'm kind of bullish about that. That's, if you think about millennials, they don't trust politicians. They don't, this is why they might like Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, because you're getting what you're getting. It's not like, you have all these people paying off the Clintons and the Bushes. They know they're getting what they're getting, and that's why they cling to them more. But overall, I think that politicians, companies, CEOs, all these people have let millennials down, with the recession and everything. And so anyone who's honest with them, they'll be able to connect with more.
We have a couple of comments about the stat that you mentioned of people bringing their parents to a job interview. So Christopher Michael, who has actually been a guest on CXOTalk, is wondering what percentage of those people got the job. And Ryan Brady is saying he can't even imagine this unless the parent is the interviewer. So shed a little bit more color on this issue.
Yeah, so I mean, after that stat, I don't know how it was broken down. I don't know if there was follow-up questions asked. That's just the stat that had popped out to me a while ago, and that I typically include in presentations, just to show the closeness of millennials with their parents and how that impacts working relationships and job interviews and everything else. So I don't know at that level. I believe it was a study done by Adecco, though, so if you want to check that out, that could be of interest to you. But it's just one instance. We've done studies that show, in terms of purchasing power, in terms of where they work, parents have this huge, huge impact, and it's because a lot of millennials are still living with their parents.
So the point is they're close with their parents, and their parents therefore have an influence on
Absolutely.
the things that they do.
Which is really important from a hiring perspective. It's important from a consumer perspective. I mean, it's an overall trend that cuts across every facet of life.
I want to quickly go back to the question around the millennial perceptions. What perception that you've heard do you think actually hurts the millennial generation the most and is a source of tension between millennials and other generations that they encounter in the workplace?
The most common ones are entitled, narcissistic, not focused, lazy. Those are the ones I get probably the most. I would say that the whole idea of entitlement is pretty interesting because, I mean, maybe it's somewhat true in some regard, but in many regard, you know, it's like these millennials, they want to accelerate business, they want to be part of it, they want to be involved in discussions, and so some of their actions, whereas they might think are harmless, older generations are fearful and think that they're going to lose their roles or whatnot, and so that there's definitely some anxiety. In terms of the narcissistic element, I think that what millennials have done is they've impacted the behavior of older generations, because now if you're a grandmother, you got to figure out Facebook in order to see pictures of your grandchildren. Like, older generations have to adopt some of these platforms in order to connect with their sons and daughters. And because of that, while millennials share everything about their life, older generations do now too. So everyone at some level is somewhat narcissistic in that regard. And then lazy, you know, every generation calls the upcoming generation lazy. I think it's because the way in which older generations view work is slightly different, right? It's like, you know, more separation between work and life, more, you know, 9 to 5, more routine. Whereas younger generations don't understand any of that. They think that makes no sense because the world has changed so much, and that, you know, why can't I work from, you know, 3 to 6 and at home when I can accomplish the same amount or more?
So we have just a few minutes left, and so we've spoken a lot about what employers should do, but what should millennials do trying to fit into modern-day corporations and advance their careers while living a peaceful, cooperative life with their employers? What should millennials do?
Well, I think the most important thing from a corporate perspective is setting expectations. I always bring that up. But from a millennial standpoint, if they don't set expectations, you have to get them in the interview to say, you know, this is what the next 3 to 5 years is going to look like. And if that's not what you want your career journey to be, then don't work at that company. So we need to start being more transparent, more honest, and more upfront about expectations from both sides. From a millennial standpoint, they have to recognize that older generations are more inclined for these in-person meetings, and that FaceTime will always become the most important thing for building a relationship. So use the technology to create more FaceTime situations. That's what I've always done. I'm an introvert. I use technology, connect with all these people, and then a percentage of them, I set up, you know, lunch dates. I just meet with them in person, and that tends to be pretty effective. And so use the technology to create in-person situations. And then I would say understand the stereotypes, and then seek to kind of surprise older generations by working harder and longer and whatever you need to do.
Lauren, we have 2 minutes left. Do you want to have the last word or the last question?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess what would your advice be for companies that are having trouble standing out among the hot startups and tech companies, and how can they really, you know, get to the forefront and appeal to these millennials and show them that there are great places to work outside of what you see as the dream place to work?
Well, I think it's a challenge for big companies because you can't like rewind. You know, if you're a dinosaur, you can't go back in time and be a dinosaur. You know, you can't go back in time and be like, you know, human, right? And so because of that, you have to make these small shifts over time. And I mean, the goal, if you can do it, is to have a kind of like a startup culture within the bigger company. In that way, you know, and kind of support millennials in the fact that if they have good ideas, you can kind of become their own, you can become like a venture capitalist and support their ideas within the company. I think that is what we're seeing. So basically companies are competing against millennials who could work at a competitor, or who could start their own company or be a freelancer or do something else. And so in order to compete against that, you have to give them in the company the same benefits or similar benefits that they would be getting with having their own company or doing freelancing or working for a competitor that has better benefits.
Okay, well, you know, we're just about out of time here. We have been talking with Dan Schawbel, who is an entrepreneur and an author, and my guest co-host for today has been Lauren Brousell, who is a staff reporter for CIO.com. So, Lauren, you're a millennial. I think this has been a pretty interesting discussion.
Absolutely. I mean, this is not only the water cooler talk at a lot of companies, but it's the conversations that you have with your friends on a social basis as well. I mean, it's top of mind. It's things that we deal with all the time. So we could keep going and going on this topic, I think.
We definitely could. And Dan Schawbel, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on episode number 134 of CXOTalk.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And everybody, come back on Friday. We will be speaking with the CIO of Kroger. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and have a great day. Bye-bye.